Hello and welcome. Today I am joined by Dr. Cath Spencer-Smith, who is a consultant sports physician. She's got many other hats now, which we'll get onto later, but that is her bread and butter. So, Cath, thank you for joining.
My pleasure. My pleasure. It's fun to be doing something fun on a kind of chilly Thursday morning.
Yeah, exactly. Well, yeah, 1st of December. We don't always release the date, but it is. I'm always very excited by Christmas, impending Christmas. So I feel like you can almost really embrace it now. November's a bit too early.
Exactly. So it's legit now. We're allowed to, aren't we?
No, exactly. So yeah, we were just talking about where we were geographically. So whereabouts are you now?
So I'm physically in Bath, but my clinics are all in London, and it's just a train ride away, as I say to people. So yeah, so I kind of edge slightly southwest, where people say my lovely, and if you're in Bristol, they say my lover. So I'm just getting used to the lingo, but it's fab. I love being here.
It's a great city, Bath, isn't it? I mean, it feels like a town more than a city, doesn't it?
Yeah, it is. It is. It's. If you've not been, get down here. It's great.
No, it really is a great place to go to. But initially, like, where are you from originally?
I suppose I am British and was born and bred in Buckinghamshire, but I've kind of like a lot of people in their careers kind of gone off around the world and done things. So I've lived in places like America and in Minnesota and weird places like that. But I would say I'm at best at home in Blighty and I'm going to stay here. So but most of my sort of clinical time has been either in places like Snowdonia or down here in London. So I've been 15 years in London and I probably keep London as my clinical home.
Right. And where did you grow up then?
One grew up in Buckinghamshire. I think that's where you say it if you're supposed to say it like that. But yeah, in Bucks, and then I went to med school in London, and then I decided I was going to be a plastics and reconstructive surgeon. So I went to America, and then I saw the light, and then I became a psychiatrist, and then I became a sports doctor.
Wow. So it's full circle. And what made you want to go into medicine in the first place?
Oh gosh, well, a lot of people say, well, they like science and they like helping people, and there's a bit of that. But in all honesty, I wasn't quite sure whether I was going to be a doctor or a vet. And in fact, first of all, I was a sound engineer, so I used to record records with people from the 80s and 90s, that kind of period of life. And eventually, I thought, oh, this is I'm not really cut out for looking after drug addicts who aren't turning up to the studio on time. Oh, I think I'll go and be a doctor. Um, and I flipped a coin because I wasn't sure whether I'd be a doctor or a vet. So because my mum's a vet, so I flipped a coin, and it didn't land on tails; it landed on heads. So I chose humans, and here we are.
Wow, that is interesting. So how long did the sound engineer piece last for then?
It's about 2.5 years. So I was one of those precocious people who did the A levels early, and so I was allowed, should we say, to go and faff about in the world of music, provided I either took it seriously or I went and did something serious if it wasn't working out. So who knows? Maybe I could have stayed, but I'm very glad I chose medicine because I like people and I'm quite nosy.
Right. Are you musical yourself then, or you're purely off stage?
No, I am pretty musical. Yeah, I sing a lot and I'm always faffing about making little tracks, but I'm too shy to share.
Yeah. So, and then what made you want to make that move then? So you don't know whether or not you were looking at vet or actual working with humans. What prompted you to decide on doing that?
Yeah, I think we often have experiences, don't we, where we meet people and you think, wow, I'm really impressed by that person and look what they're doing. And actually, although lots of the time people think, oh, I want to be a surgeon or I want to be X, Y, or Z. Actually, I was just very impressed by my family friend GP down the road. And I thought all the people seemed to really interact well with her and she had a wonderful way. And I remember being very poorly in hospital and her coming to see me. She actually came and visited me as a GP. She didn't have to do that. And I thought, wow, okay, this could be a nice thing, right? Helping humans, and it is interesting. Medicine is fascinating, especially if you're into kind of understanding sort of ghoulish things and also understanding using your brain in ways that you hadn't really been taxed before when you were at school. So not only do you have to try and figure out the sort of sciencey bit and the pathology and God knows how we actually learned anatomy before video came along, but somehow we did. And then you've got to put it together with interacting with patients and whilst you're trying to remember how to examine them and the questions you have to ask them. And it was all great fun. Wasn't it like that when you went to uni? Were you stimulated by that kind of what got you into sort of sports and science? What was that all about?
Quite frankly, I was such an immature student there as well. It's like really, it was like I liked sport, I played sports, probably my parents wanted me to go to university, so it was like, right, well, sport then. So it wasn't really, it was considered, but it also kind of wasn't as well. It was like, well, I'm doing no doubt that I was going to uni, and it was like, well, sports science is going to be the one that I was going to do. And it was great, but I did feel like I was probably a bit immature in terms of I didn't appreciate it like you would do now, really. But no, I definitely agree. Like, it's the stimulus, it's the other things as well, which are really great, aren't they? Like meeting people, living away from home, and all of those developmental skills like that.
Yeah, exactly. And I learned to cook a mean curry because I lived in Hackney, and I had lots of Indian aunties who would teach me how to cook curry. So,
So where were you doing that then? Where were you studying?
So I studied at Barts in London, and because obviously it's really expensive to live in London, you'd end up living in the grottiest of places, some of which were quite dangerous in retrospect. Dalston wasn't as salubrious as it is now, but and you'd live in some house that was falling apart with the floor falling in and pipes not working. But we had a great time, and med students they're quite work hard, play hard, because unlike other kind of disciplines at uni, we mixed with a lot of London University students and Queen Mary students because our buildings were next to them. But med students, it's like 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, with a Wednesday afternoon off for sport, and so you don't really kind of have much time off from that. And any time off, you'd either be trying to kind of earn a bit of money to survive, and so you ended up becoming a big kind of clan, really. And we really did work hard and play hard, and gosh, some of the antics we used to get up to, but that's another story.
So it is, because it is a funny thing, isn't it? When you go and live in these places, it probably is a bit of a dump that you're living in, but that's what it is, isn't it? That is your environment.
Exactly. And I think of some of our neighbours. We'd lived cheek by jowl. One of the places I lived in Hackney, but next door was kind of like a halfway house for people who'd been in hospital or coming out of prison who'd been on drugs, and they would crack up the sound system at 2 a.m. and there'd be hip hop playing through the wall or whatever, and we just had to kind of we just went with it, and they were friends. They would come to our drinks and stuff like that. But what I really liked about, especially being in London, is the sheer melting pot of people. So if you've grown up in the kind of sort of quite white, middle-aged, kind of salubrious little society in Bucks, so Bucks is a nice place, but it's a little bit white, I'm going to call it that. So I always feel slightly uncomfortable when I'm in areas when I'm not mixing now, because I spent so much time in London, where you have everybody, all kinds of backgrounds, people, hilarious stories, different personalities, different ways of thinking about things, different cultures. We're very lucky with that in London. I'm sure it's probably similar up in Manchester where you are as well. And I kind of feel sorry for people that haven't really experienced living with every different kind of mankind all together in the same street, in the same house, kind of thing. It's something that's very special. I've really enjoyed that aspect of my life.
No, I definitely agree. I'm from Southport originally, which is about 20 miles north of Liverpool, and there's pure white there pretty much, and it's just what you're used to, isn't it? It's like that is just what your environment is. So going to a bigger city is definitely it's a really different setup, but it does open your eyes to a few different things in a good way. So in terms of like the group that you were with in the medical school, then are you still close with those people? Do you still keep in touch?
Yeah, only a couple. Because Barts was like a mixture of people who were very, very rich, and then there were us, the paupers. So when I mean rich, I mean I remember this. When you're at uni and the banks come around to sort of try and sweet talk you into joining the bank, because they realise that clients are quite sticky. So if you stay with the bank, you probably stay with the bank. So I remember they got everybody, put your hands up in the air, put your hand down if you're with Barclays, put your hand down if you haven't chosen yet, put your hand down if with Lloyds. And he went around all of the banks, and eventually there's one little toff sitting there with his hand elevated, and the guy couldn't guess which bank he banked with, and eventually he said Coots and Co. And so if you don't know Coots and Co, I don't know how much money you have to bank with them. Nothing wrong with being with Coots and Co, but some of our kind of students in our year would drive around in Morgans, those kind of like 50 grand cars and stuff. And my friend Adrian Franklin and I would drive around in a patched up Land Rover, like trying to get together 10 pence for a litre of fuel.
That's all part of the fun, isn't it? Isn't it? Like when you've got absolutely no money and you're delighted by getting something that's like really look at now, you don't even think about it, but it just meant a lot.
Yeah. The reason I got appendicitis when I was a medical student was I had nothing to eat that week except a box of All Bran. And All Bran's great for keeping you regular, but if you eat too much of it, it literally sets like cement in your guts. And so that's how I got appendicitis, because I was poor.
Might have to use that as a clip. I don't know if that's a good one or a bad one. But
Yeah, don't eat All Bran, guys, honestly, please.
yeah, my auntie used to love All Bran, but yeah, it just never appealed to me. Weetabix was about as far as I go, which probably hasn't got quite as many fibre in it as Weetabix. So then when you were studying then, so did you have a clear plan of what you wanted to go on to do?
I thought I did, and it would sort of change. It's one of those things whereby in med school you kind of go around different disciplines, don't you? So you'd spend some time in general surgery, and you think, oh, this is great. I love sticking my hands in a kind of slightly slippery abdomen. I want to go do that. Or psychiatry is fascinating. I want to work with those folk, and so it would change. Eventually, I thought I was going to be a surgeon, so I went away to America with my then boyfriend. Now, thankfully, I have married a sensible person. And so I went to the Mayo Clinic, and I thought, great, I'm going to be here. Let's be a plastic and reconstructive surgeon. So in places in America, if somebody has had a terrible cancer or been in a terrible car crash, and they may need to reconstruct parts of it, we're not talking here pretty faces and boobs. We're talking let's fill a hole in a human being with other bits of the human being, like chopping off a fibula and taking out blocks of rectus from their abdomen, tram flaps, and plugging them in holes and stuff. So I learnt all the kind of funny, fiddly, vascular stuff, we'd wear these loops and you'd be squirting heparin down blood vessels and stitching people back together again. And then one day the boss said, let's get this guy ready for theatre. He's got a big head and neck cancer, and PS, we're going to leave him just with an airway, and then he's going to be peg fed for the rest of his life. And when I was clerking the guy, I realised he had a massive melanoma on his back anyway, which wasn't why we were treating him. And I said that to the boss, we really need to have a conversation, don't we, about kind of end of life care, because this guy's got mets everywhere and you want to chop him up. And I remember him stamping his fist on the table saying, we must operate. And I was saying, why? He said, because we can. And then I got on a plane and left that evening and ran away to Snowdonia. So my
Really?
surgical career ended.
That's crazy.
Yeah. So then I was a psychiatrist for a few years, which I absolutely loved. But then I missed bodies. And because I'd worked in America for a long time, I'd become large, like lots of people in America. And I was so unfit that I realised I had to lose lots of weight. So I thought I'd take up running. And I weigh about 8.5 stone now, and I weighed about 13.5 stone back then. And so not unsurprisingly, I got injured. But within a year, I'd lost 4 stone and had run the marathon. And that's where I eventually fell in love with sports medicine, because I realised I had to understand a bit more about why I was breaking myself.
Right. So in terms of psychiatry then, so how easy was it to move into psychiatry from what you'd been studying then?
Well, so what happened was my grandmother said, you can stay with me, Cath, but you have to go and get a job. So I walked into a place called Ysbyty Gwynedd, which is in Snowdonia, in my climbing boots, and said, have you got any jobs? And they said, yes, someone didn't turn up for the start of their rotation, their senior house officer rotation in psychiatry. That space needs filling. You've been a house officer in the UK, that will do. Off you go. And so I'd literally just walked into the job because they needed some person to fill it. That's how it happened.
Wow, so it was nothing to do with what you'd done prior.
Oh, good God, no! I'd be totally unsuitable, wouldn't I? So I started from scratch, but I had a great boss, and he sort of trained me up, and I did my psych exams, and yeah, so I could still be there, but I missed the bodies as well.
And how helpful do you think going through that job was for what you're doing now, or for what you've gone on to do?
Gosh, I think everyone should spend some time working in psychiatry. I think what's so good about it is it really helps you to sort of really understand human suffering. And I don't mean that in a sort of voyeuristic way. What I mean is you get to understand why people get to be in certain situations in life. So sometimes in medicine, we find that someone's sick or broken and we think, oh, if only you'd looked after yourself better, or what are you doing, with that risky life behavior? And you don't really understand how people get to be where they are. And also, I find it very helpful for really, really developing very, very good listening skills. Sometimes you sit in a room with a patient for an hour and not saying anything, and eventually they would be the first person to speak, and that would be quite profound, and also very good for dealing with I'm going to just say it, manipulative people, actually, because sometimes we can be tied in knots sometimes by certain aspects of mankind. So pretty good at sussing out who's not to be sort of trusted. But psychiatry is lovely, and we did get people better, which was great, because sometimes I think it has a bit of a view of being, it's all about what's wrong with you. And we worked in a very forward thinking unit called the Hairgust unit, where there was loads and loads of exercise therapy, lots of arts therapy, all kinds of stuff now that probably there isn't the funding for. And so our people, you know, got better, and they went to halfway houses and come back for some respite care. And yeah, it was a lovely, really nice place to work. I loved it.
That's really good. Is that my dad was actually head of education at Ashworth Hospital.
Wow.
So that's a psychiatric hospital, and it was with like some, you know, Ian Brady was in there, and he was dealing with some of those people. And I think he said that the patients weren't the challenge. It was actually the people, that the staff that were in there, that was that posed more of the challenges. But yeah, some of the, it does sound that's obviously top security, but it's a very interesting area, isn't it?
Yeah.
That, and I feel like it's really developed even more now, hasn't it, with mental health and more acceptance. That was 20 or 30 years ago that he was there.
Yeah.
But yeah, I agree with you. I think it's a really good thing. My girlfriend's done psychology, and she's working in that field now, and it's really interesting, isn't it? Because it's like understanding yourself. It's like therapy over here is a bit of a taboo subject, but I guess in the States that's quite commonplace, isn't it?
Yeah. So they'd ask me two questions in America. Gee, which shrink will you be going to? And gee, which chapel will you be going to? And I used to say neither. And then I didn't have many friends for a while, so I soon learned to say I might go to this chapel. But yeah,
Wait,
no,
so that was, when was that then? Like, what how long ago was that like the therapy was?
Oh, that was so like that would be like the mid-90s, something like that, wouldn't it? Something like that kind of time scale. So, but yeah, no, it's very, I mean, it's great. Americans are fantastic in being very open about that, and we've got a lot to learn from them in that respect. I think that especially though medicine, I mean, crikey, we're the worst at looking after ourselves and the worst looking after our people, and hopefully that's changing now. But you know, crikey, you only have to look at what's happening now with people who are just frazzled by the pandemic, and people leaving in droves from the NHS, and understandably feeling really undervalued on all sides, really, by patients who are saying, I want my care now, but P.S. I'm completely exhausted, and also then hospitals just losing the kind of the kinship and the teamship. We used to have firms when I was a junior, and we don't have those anymore. People works different hours, and I feel very sorry for the young junior doctors now who aren't part of those sort of families, those firm families, because they got a different consultant on with them every day of the week. You know, it's not the same.
So what was that then? The firms?
The firms would be like, so you would have like a consultant, and then they would have a registrar and a senior registrar and an SHO and a house officer, and then you'd have your little scurry of med students who are attached to the firm, and you all work collectively together. So when you're on call, you're on call. When you're in clinic, you know, you're looking after the wards. It was one sort of unit, as it were. And now what happens is that you're not part of that structure. It's in order to cover the hours. It's all sort of very piecemeal. So, you know, we worked minimum of 100 hours a week back then, and most weeks it was more like 120, sometimes 130 hours a week. You know, it'd be completely illegal now, but I'm not saying the care was great, but we were together. And we always had the support, so you knew you could rely on that person to sort of to look after you in a sticky situation. You know, I could phone up my lovely guy, my Reg, he was fantastic, and I'd have a little wobble on the phone saying, oh, I think his lung's collapsed, and you know, he'd come and help me with a chest drain and stuff like that. So, you know, so there's not that kind of community. So I do feel sorry for them now. I really do, for the youngsters coming through medicine.
So yeah, I can see why that infrastructure that you've got there, and that support is going to be massive, isn't it? Because that is crazy hours, and you're dealing with very serious things.
Yeah. I don't know how we didn't kill a few people. Hopefully we didn't, but it was really tough. And I remember the longest weekend I worked I got to work at Friday at 7 a.m. in the morning, and I went home Tuesday at 5 p.m. So how many hours is that? All day Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. And that was to cover, that was almost less than a 1 in 2. And I remember I walked naked into the living room that evening, where my then ex-husband was sat with his friends. And I said, completely stark as, have you taken the bloods for theatre? Because I was effectively having a sort of psychotic state, you know, from lack of sleep. And I was just merrily put to bed.
But that is crazy, isn't it? Like
Yeah.
that is such a dangerous situation that you're having to deal with.
But thankfully, it's not like that anymore. Thank goodness.
So after you'd gone through that period, then what was the next step for you then? So you'd gone to America. Like, how did you get to America again? What prompted that?
So it all started up when I was a med student. So Bart's had a kind of medical exchange gig, should we say, with the Mayo Clinic, which is in Rochester, Minnesota, which is a very strange place. And so it kind of was an evolution of that, really. So there are lots of kind of swaps that happen sort of between hospitals around the world and things, but that Bart's was very associated with the Mayo. So Mayo's got a few sites, but Minnesota was really, really cold, and it would be -20 in the winters. And eventually I couldn't hack another cold winter. It just got, I think, to me, when people complain about the weather, I go, no, you haven't experienced cold unless you've been to Minnesota, where you'd go for a swim and then your hair would freeze on the way home, and you'd have winter itch, which is basically where you breathe out and your breath sort of crystallizes on your face and makes your skin feel crunchy.
Yeah, sounds festive though.
It's very nice. The snow is brown because it's too cold. It snows once at the beginning of winter, and it just sort of gets kicked around like brown sugar. And it's too cold for it to precipitate again. So you end up with the same dirty snow you had back in November.
All right, that doesn't sound quite as festive.
But it was great, yeah. And then after that, yeah, then psychiatry. I did my GP badges after that, just because that's what you have to do to kind of get back into bodies. And then eventually, a very forward-thinking rheumatologist said, Cath, come and do some kind of MSK sporty medicine stuff, and that started up as a big gig in Snowdonia, and eventually I moved to London. Yeah.
Right. So how did you end up in Wales then?
Well, that's when I ran away from the States. So I sort of stayed around, yes, and then London was a progression. I also ran away from my ex-husband as well, but London was a progression, because eventually you need to learn and keep going with people who are much better than you all of the time to keep moving, and I ended up becoming the big fish in a small pond, and so I thought, this isn't good. I'm not going to progress. I need to kind of go and learn where all the clever people are, and a lot of them are in the big centres, obviously the big cities around London. So I came down to London, and back in the day we didn't have the formal pathway for sports medicine training. So dinosaurs like me had to sort of carve a path and collect experience and hang out with people and look after sports teams, usually for peanuts, and then eventually, retrospectively, we were allowed to get our consultant's badge, which thankfully now is a proper pathway.
Was it called sports medicine then, even though it wasn't an official thing?
I think so. That's what we called it. We didn't call it SEM. We didn't call it sport and exercise medicine until a bit later. We probably just called it sports medicine back then. But obviously, all of sports medicine is founded on basic healthy principles that we need to apply. And I think a lot of people go into sports medicine think it's going to be all about working with elite people. And I still work with elite people, but I also like working with people who need to get active because they're going through chemotherapy, or people who've got a horrible hip problem and they've got some other physical problems as well. And all those things apply. So, and especially mental health as well, right? So, yeah, it should be the mix it is.
Yeah, no, I was chatting with Leon Creaney recently. He was saying that he was on that initial course with James Brown and Rick Sear and various other people. So it's amazing how recent it is, isn't it?
I know. Bless him, Rick. He was a student of mine, but at one point, I think we've all at some point we've all been each other's students at some point, I dare say. And Rick's lovely, and what's great now is that we're seeing this kind of stepping stone, so people who are coming through can realise it is possible. Because one thing you're told all the time is, oh, it's really competitive, you can't do it. And I remember lovely Stuart, who's still looks after all the Commonwealth Games sort of teams and athletes. I remember him saying to me, Cath, you can never earn a full-time sort of wage in sports medicine. It won't happen. And of course he can now. But back then, maybe it was a bit more of a challenge. So, but I encourage people to start early, I think, really, and start getting experience kind of early if you want to be doing this, because it's probably one of the harder disciplines in terms of stuff that you have to do outside of your own 9-to-5 kind of existence as a doctor. So you've got to be prepared to kind of give up the evenings and the weekends and all the uncomfortable, massive long trips, and many a year I've spent kind of on a coach with sweaty rowers going up to Silveretta to do heavy training at altitude, that kind of stuff. So there's going to be a bit of discomfort that isn't paid, for sure.
Yeah, that seems to be the theme across a lot of it. Sport sounds really glamorous, but that's not always the reality, is it, in terms of what you're doing?
Yeah.
And then, so for you then, what were the teams that you were working with, or the athletes that you were working with to begin with?
Yeah. So I've done a tiny bit with football, but football generally is not my gig, and so I very much focused on things that I love. So I don't know how I got drawn into rowing, but because I was very much into triathlon and Ironman and stuff. I remember rowing wanted to expand their clinicians to have a bit more of a broad breadth of clinicians. So they wanted to look at people who are into sort of endurance sports as well as lifting and as well. So they reached out to me. So I've never sat in a rowing boat in my life. Okay, and I'm about 5'3", so I'd make a crap rower. And yet I've worked extensively with GB rowers and all the kind of funny problems they get, like, you know, rib stress fractures and weird things like that, and lots and lots of track and field people. Also lots of people who are kind of in more extreme sports as well. So kind of rock climbers, people who are circus performers, elite dancers, people who do really fun weird things with their bodies, you know. And in clinic, I love that when I've got people in clinic, or sometimes I'll take them into the corridor where there's a bit more space, and they'll do their weird thing, their weird shape. It's if they're, you know, contortionist or something like that. And the looks of people sitting in the waiting room when this person comes out and does it, it's absolutely, they're speechless. It's great. So my clinics aren't very usual. We do lots of fun things leaping around. Yeah.
And so whilst you were getting into this with the rowing, etc., then, so what were you doing as a day job, so to speak?
So I had a couple of sort of, you often start off with a bit of a sort of portfolio set of gigs, really. So I was doing some work that was for a private sports clinic in London. I was also teaching, but I would do this crazy commute up to Bangor University. So they asked me to write an MSc in exercise rehab. So I wrote that and went and delivered that. And I would do some other gigs as well for, you know, kind of other little clinics that needed some SEM sort of input. So you often find that you have these little sort of hodgepodge jobs when you're first starting out. And I still did a little bit of emergency care and out of hours, but so when I went and taught in Bangor, I would also do an overnight shift, and that was like a job that was you were everything. So you were there with the paramedic, and Snowdonia is quite a rural place, so you had to be the anaesthetist and the kind of GP and the everything. So you would go and like go out, helicoptered out to a gig where there'd be a farmer trapped under a dry stone wall that collapsed on him or something like that. Or I remember one time getting called out to go, and I was shipped out to an oil rig because their doctor got meningitis and I had to go and resuscitate him. So those were fun gigs to do. I think everyone should do a bit of emergency care out of hours, because you really learn to think on your feet then.
Yeah, that
Yeah.
sounds like it.
Yeah.
So then, so you were doing Bangor at the same time as London, or was that?
Yeah, I did.
Wow.
So I did this crazy. So I do London the first half of the week, and then I'd go up to Bangor on a Wednesday afternoon, teach in the afternoon, and then sort of work overnight, and come back late on a Thursday. And I did that for a whole year, this sort of overlap. Yeah, so I got to know the Virgin train people very well, and they'd pour me a cup of Earl Grey before I'd even got on the train.
Yeah, so was that then? Because I do miss Virgin trains, actually. It's not as good now. That's gone.
Not good. It's not good.
It's definitely not as good. But anyway, I won't go into that. So what would you'd get the train up, was it to Manchester and then come across then, or were you somewhere else?
You go Euston direct to what's Llandudno Junction, and then I'd jump in my little car that was always, the battery was going flat. I'd leave at the station there, and
Right.
go and teach at Bangor, and then work in emergency care, and also worked in something called Teams, targeted access to early and musculoskeletal services, which was the sort of NHS sports medicine service up there, which was fantastic. Actually, we set that up, and it was a real flagship for stopping people sort of dipping around all the disciplines. So all the referrals for anything, you know, arthritic hip, hot joint, sporty stuff, neck pain, chronic pain, all came in, was triaged by three wise men, as it were, metaphorically, and then so we could just pull out the people straight away that needed to go direct to surgery or should come to us. And then we had gypsies, you know, GPs with specialist interests. Are they still called that now? I don't know. They still called that.
I'm not sure, actually.
Yeah. And so we looked after the majority of people, and we cut waiting lists hugely. We cut the pain waiting list from 18 months to 3 weeks. Can you believe that? Because we could just take out people and deal with stuff straight away and stop this chronicity happening. It was fantastic service. It was really good.
And for those sort of things, like implementing that's a really amazing outcome. Is it how come that sort of thing doesn't get taken on, or like it seems to be really just pockets in the NHS. And I know it's a massive organisation.
I know. Our kind of what should we call it? Setup was modelled in other places as well, like Newcastle and other things. But I don't understand why it hasn't been shared. I think it's because it was Wales, and NHS England is sort of separate to Wales. But it is ridiculous that we don't share more, and because the model worked easily, and it was funded with the same existing funding. I think we had something like £3,000 to sort of set up some training time or something like that. But that was all that the input extra cash that we got from whatever it's called, the Welsh Health Board now would be called something different. But we don't share our successes in terms of modelling, and I don't know why that is. It's just daft, because the NHS could really do with all the love it could get right now. And if you can model these systems and processes elsewhere and save cash and money and human pain, then it's got to be a good thing, right?
I would definitely think so. It's we work with them from our side, and it's just, you know there's challenges, but it's just like so slow with things, and it's just like there's very simple things you would think. However, it is easy from the outside to be saying that. I know it's more difficult inside, because you've got so many layers, haven't you, of management.
That's right, and it's like working with corporates, isn't it? In the sense that you have to get so many yeses, and the red tape and all the stuff. Yeah, and by then you've moved on.
Yeah, well, you lose the energy, don't you, if you're trying to push something through. Like, we work with the clinicians on like the front line, so to speak, and then they've got to internally sell different things up the chain, and it's difficult. It's not always easy to do that. So how long did you do the time in Wales then?
So I probably did about sort of two. Well, Wales, I was there for a decade, but my crossover was about a year, and then I've been in London now, working since 2006, 7, something like that. I'm getting old, can't remember. And so then I worked in a private clinic at Pure in London for a few years, and then set up my own gig, and that was in about 2010. And so Sportdoc London's been going since then. Just little old me, which is great, and lots of allied colleagues that I kind of work alongside with, as sort of an informal but structured way, we'll call it. And so I did that 2 very long days and a half day a week, and then the rest of the week I do my new gig, which is Private Practice Ninja. So that's right. My other half of the week.
Yeah, no, that's great then. So for the time that you spent, because pure sports medicine was quite ahead of its time back then, wasn't it? With Mike Bundy and
Mike. Oh, bless him. He's retired now, isn't he? Mike's great. And so again, sort of forward-thinking model, which is have sports docs working with physios and osteos, and plugging in imaging and stuff. So the model works because it's private healthcare, so you can get that MRI that day for a person with a query stress fracture. But it doesn't work as well in the NHS. But still the framework is appropriate, and I really liked it in that we all learned from each other. I've learned all my life, and my best learning has come from physios and osteos, without a doubt. And I spent lots of time working in military units, and as part of that role at Pure, and so the best learning doesn't come from doctors. The best learning comes from physios and osteos, for sure.
Why do you think that? Chris Myers will like that one, being both.
Yeah, don't make his head any bigger. No, why? Because I think so. We've got a lot of analytical skills, but a lot of the time our kind of practical skills are pretty bad. And also physios are, because they spend so much time with their patients, they really understand when somebody's not progressing and why that is. And also think just in terms of basic understanding of what good movement looks like. So I think my slight criticism, I think, with baby sports doctors coming through, is that they don't get enough of that. And so I'm obsessed with movement. So lots of my colleagues love their tenders and jabbing things, and that's great, and that's very important, of course. But for me, my kind of USP is I really understand really good movement. I understand why someone's failing post surgery, or why someone's got in a rut, or when they've got multiple problems going on at the same time with their hip and spine together, etc. So I love unpicking all that, and knowing what's deficient in good movement, and what needs to change, and when progress isn't happening.
Right. So is that what made you want to set your own thing up, really? That you had your own philosophy of how to look at things?
No, I kind of ran away for other reasons. I kind of got myself deliberately kicked out of Pure because I didn't quite agree with some ethics that was going on there. But that's another story. So I had to set up my practice like overnight, and so because we won't go into the gory stuff, but let's just say I've had a history, right, of running away when there's been an ethics issue that would disagree with my values. Might happen again at some point, who knows? But but I have a deeply ingrained sense of values and ethics, and it's very, very important to me. So if it's not going right and I can't change it, I have to go. So that's what I did, and I got myself locked out from all these relationships to do with, when you sign a contract and you have to not go and work in that area for five years afterwards or whatever. So I had to set up a practice overnight and suddenly get 150k of income coming back in that I'd kind of lopped off in one fell swoop. And so I learned pretty fast how to market a practice, right? So that's what I did.
Yeah, so that must have been really challenging, isn't it? Setting up a business at any point is difficult because you've all the infrastructure that you think of is it's not just the delivery of treatment from your side. So what was that experience like then?
Very quick learning, and I like tech, and I like to work hard. So I just rolled up my sleeves basically and got on with it, and did it very, very quickly. So most people sort of tiptoe out of one main role and into another, and I'd had the bones of Sportdoc set up, but then to go into it suddenly full time. And thankfully, because I'd formed good relationships with people, people found me again and came back to me, and patients found me again and came back to me. And so a lot of private practice obviously is about good relationships and how you treat your colleagues and how they see you treating their patients, and that's important. So yeah, setting up a gig, there's lots of things you have to do, lots of foundations you have to put in place, and then it's all about graft and making connections and marketing, lots of digital marketing for sure.
And so do you think, was that a beneficial thing for you really? Did that help you in some ways, that you actually made you just do all of this stuff? You have to just do it straight away?
Absolutely, without a shadow of a doubt. It threw me in at the deep end, and that's why I became very successful. So, and I think in some respects we almost need to treat ourselves. We need to think, especially as clinicians, we need to think of ourselves as businesses, as well as obviously putting the patient first, which is the most important thing. But and I don't think many people think of it as a business, and they think of it as a sort of, I get paid to do my nice thing, and it's not a job, it's a business. So you have to be the CEO, and you have to do the marketing, you have to make all the connections, you have to put all those systems and processes in place and handle the money and all that jazz. Yeah, but it's fun.
Well, no, it is, but I think it is an important thing, and the Americans do it very well as well, don't they? Maybe too well on the commercial side of things.
Yeah.
But it's like over here, we were at Therapy Expo last week, and a friend of mine, he runs a business called Elevated Clinic, but he asked a question to some of the people that were listening to his talk about what are your KPIs? How do you monitor all of this? What's your goal? And very few people had an answer for it.
That's right.
And the sales piece of it as well, they were like, well, no one wants to do sales, do they? They all know we're here to deliver treatment. It's like, well, if you're in private practice, then
yeah, that's right. And it's always considered an icky thing, isn't it, sales? So I encourage people to think about it as being, well, it's not about you asking people for money, it's about what you can do for the patient. So if you remove yourself from that, remove your ego from that, and say, I'm here to provide people with sort of excellent information, really good advice, presenting yourself online in that way so that people come see you for a resource, then effectively you sort of sell yourself. But you do eventually have to ask people to, PS, you can book in to see me, because I've seen physios giving amazing talks, and then somebody go up to them at the end of it and say, do you know anyone who could help me with that problem? And then you want to slap yourself on the head and say, you didn't ask, did you? So we have to get used to asking, and it's not a problem, because patients who want a solution to their problems, they want the convenience of that, they want the expertise of that. It's totally appropriate that they are okay to invest in that. I like to go out, have amazing experiences and holidays. I like to go for a nice dinner, etc. And I expect to invest in that process, right? So, and if I've got a health problem, I want to go and see the best person I've had the best reviews about, person who really seems to understand me when I kind of look at their website and their video. And I want to invest in care for that. So it's okay for patients to want to pay for care.
Yeah, no, I agree as well. It's like, if you want to develop your business, you need money to do that. If you want to invest in your team, you need money. If you want to get the best people, you need money. If you want the best technology.
Exactly.
So yeah, no, I definitely agree with that. So is that something that have you always had that mindset, or was that when you set this up and then you saw, actually, no, this is really important?
Yeah, I think more the latter, exactly. So I suddenly thought, okay, I need to know how to market and grow a business like this. And so that kind of fed in naturally to people saying, oh, you did that quick, Cath, how did that happen? And so people would ask me to sort of help them with their practices, and eventually that was an informal thing, became a sort of more formal arrangement. And so we set up Private Practice Ninja, and I took my husband out of corporate to come work with me, and we have a team of about 4 or 5 people now, and it's great. So we help people to start practice, to grow a practice, to market the practice. We teach people how to do it themselves if they want to do it themselves, so we have an academy. But we also do lots of done for you stuff. So like later today, I'll be doing lots of copywriting for a Max Fax guy, and then we'll go and do some video with a pain consultant and things like that. And that's great. Video is really where it's at the moment, and where it needs to be, because there's no quicker way to sort of garner trust with a future patient. If they see you showing up and you look smiley, you speak their language, you're not some stiff, frightening surgeon. And so, yeah, if you've not got video on your site, you're missing a trick. You need some video. It's really important.
So yeah, so that is interesting then. So how long did it take for you to set up Private Practice Ninja then?
So we set it up, how many years am I going? About 5, I can remember, it was 5 or 7. We set it up pretty quickly. So and one of the big mainstays of that was because GDPR was coming. So remember in 2018 that was coming on, and nobody knew what to do for GDPR. And I'm still pretty sure that there's vast quantities of clinicians out there who aren't compliant because they don't know what they're doing. And you only need one officious patient who's a lawyer who gets a bit cross with you and then waggles their finger at you, and then you've destroyed that afternoon, that weekend, worrying about compliance. And so one of the reasons we wanted to do Ninja was to make sure that we could help people be compliant, help with all their documentation, all their data. My hubby comes from a tech background, so he helps people to get all their systems and processes compliant, because lots of people are using dodgy little bits of software here and things and that there, and and even their computers might not be encrypted and stuff like that. So that was one big part of it. But also I just eventually it came that I just really liked helping the people who help the people. It's so nice when you've got a lovely physio osteo who is like struggling to get traction. They're amazing. They're an amazing clinician. And then with a bit of help, you can help them be found by all these people. It's fantastic. I love it.
Yeah, no, that's great, and it really does come across it in terms of that as well then. So like how does it work then? So if someone comes to you or they see you and say, right, we're interested in being involved in this, what tends to happen?
So we work with people in a number of ways. So sometimes if people have got a sort of problem, and it might be something like they're simply struggling to sort of get found online. So sometimes we'll work with people and we'll simply do a power hour. But a lot of what we'll do is we'll do some web and copy building and video with them. And I frequently work with clinicians almost like on a monthly basis, where we'll do their marketing. I call it with them, so we get a bit of input for them. You cannot abdicate all your tech or all your copy and everything to somebody else who's external to you. But we've got lots of fantastic processes so that I could draw out of you, I could have conversation with you and draw out of you the key niche areas that you work in. And then I'll do tons of keyword research, lots and lots of kind of using tools in Google, so we know exactly what to write to help you get found, and helping people very importantly with their systems and processes. So physios and osteos in particular are very poor, I found, at outsourcing. So simple things like dictating letters, having someone else to type that up, so you're not spending 2 hours faffing about stamping on the keyboard at the end of the evening. And also people who need to grow teams as well, where you may need more structure around that. And so we work with some private GPs in that way as well. So whatever you need systematically or marketing wise for your private practice, we can help. Or if you want to learn to do it yourself, then we have a lovely community in our academy, and it's been going for 2 years now. That started after lockdown, and that's nice. And people can join for a very nominal fee and just learn everything that we teach is what we do in our business, and you can just learn to do it yourself.
No, that's great. I think I really like the point about processes, about doing things that you want to do. We do personality tests when we're recruiting.
Yeah.
And we've chosen the Clifton Strengths test because I'm a massive advocate of if you do what you enjoy doing,
yes,
you're going to be more motivated, you're going to do it better, and you're going to enjoy your job more.
Absolutely. Yeah, we use Colby, something called Colby A, if you've heard of that as well, which helps. So I'm what's called a quick start. And my husband's a fact finder, so we have to have rules around making decisions. So sometimes I'll have to slow down so he can do the research, and other times he's not allowed to rain on my parade. So, but yeah, I think they can be very helpful when you're building a team, for sure. These tools can be really helpful.
And I think it is, and even just understanding how you speak to people and what motivates people. I think that's the key thing. Like one of our key people's on maternity at the moment, and we've kind of decided, instead of taking someone on, we've because we've had a couple of other people start, but just any admin that I've got to do, I am horrendous. I'm just like pulling my hair out of just looking through I'm not a detailed person in terms of, I don't write long emails. It's just not my way of dealing with things. And it's interesting, isn't it? Just like with some people love it, and it's so funny.
Absolutely. Yeah, my med tech's amazing. I couldn't live without her, honestly. She's the best. She thinks of it before I've even thought of it, and she'll follow up all those little details. And that you need to wrap yourself around these people who can sort of mirror the things that you don't do very well and that they love doing. And that's the perfect team. Don't hire people who are just like you, otherwise you just got a bunch of yous.
Yeah, no, exactly. Have you read the book The E-Myth Revisited?
Yes. So it's a sort of a harsh reality curve there, isn't it? But it's very true. So yeah, and he's done a further reiteration, a more modern one, isn't he now? So
the revisited one.
Yeah, exactly.
Revisited.
Yeah.
No, because I think that's brilliant. Maybe don't always practice it as much as you should do, but getting processes in place,
so important.
Just get it done early, isn't it? Get it done early, and then you can scale more easily.
Exactly. Otherwise, you're just a bad employee with a terrible boss, as I call it. Yeah.
I've not heard that one before, but yeah, that's quite good. So, I mean, you obviously come across, you're a real people person as well as doing all of this side of things. But like, what in terms of culture for both where you want to work and the people that you're working with, and I mean both, not because I think sometimes people think you just want to work as a client with anyone, whereas
no.
I think like what's your view on that then? What in terms of culture?
We're quite fussy about who we work with, actually. So we don't work with anyone who's not nice. So the kind of people we love working with are people who are kind of who are a bit entrepreneurial in the way that they're thinking. I don't necessarily mean sort of purely money minded, not at all. I mean kind of people who are really interested in sort of developing things. So for example, working with a lovely psychiatrist and psychiatric nurse in the sphere of ADHD, and they're building together a fantastic course for people who are high performing people with ADHD, because pills don't build skills. And it's been fascinating working with them, who've got a real kind of beautiful project they want to bring together. So I like working with people who are very clear on the kind of outcomes they want to get for their patients, or the way that they want to work. They want to make private practice work for their life as well, because they want to spend time with their family, and they want to make sure that they aren't killing themselves with work. And people who can then also maybe have a little passion project on the side. So they may want to do their sort of charity gig here, and actually having a really good private practice enables them to do that. So people who are enthusiastic, they're prepared to do a bit of work, they're excited to kind of get their practice going. They're not just there to see a couple of people on a Tuesday. People who really want to make this a significant proportion of their working life, and are passionate about learning how to do it well. So actually they can really love it, because lots of people step into private practice because they're tired or burnt out, and you don't want to join private practice to have that same scenario. So we help people to really like working in private practice and really enjoy those relationships with patients, rather than thinking, oh no, it's another man with a knee, So people who are enthusiastic, who want to work with clinicians who really understand the tech and really understand the geek as well, as I call it. We're total geeks. We love that. And people who are maybe people who've perhaps tried other ways, and maybe they've gone to a marketing agency and they felt a bit ripped off, or they've done some Google ads and it just cost them nothing, and they cost them loads and didn't get anything out of it. Those are the kinds of people really good at helping.
No, I think it is good. I think there's a lot of the time people just think, oh, work's work. You're not going to enjoy it. You got to do that. You got to do this. And it's like a lot of the time you don't really need to. It's like you actually can pick what you want to do, and you kind of attract those things to you.
Exactly. Yeah. So we love it.
Yeah. No, it's great. No, it's really interesting. And then, so just to what do you see the future for you then, in terms of whether it's Ninja or the other things?
I think I'll always be a sports doctor. Maybe one day a week, or probably 2 days a week still, just because I love my athletes and they're great. And the older and more decrepit I get, the more I need people who can help me and me as well. But what I really want to do with Ninja is just really get into the sort of conscious mind of people, that they can learn these business skills and they can have help to sort of outsource it in the right way with people who understand clinicians. And we really want to put together some more events going forwards. We did a retreat before lockdown happened. That was fantastic. We want to do some more of those as well and get people together. Because one of the best things about Ninja has been the big community that we built, and people support each other within that. So yeah, and I really want to help people get into video. I want to see doctors, physios, surgeons, osteos, podiatrists showing up on camera and telling how they can help people and helping patients to solve problems. So video is the way to go.
Very good. Brilliant. No, I appreciate that. Last question. If you had to pick one particular memory, or you don't have to pick one, but just in terms of that, is there any one part of your career that's really stuck in your mind as being as either really good or maybe not as good?
Gosh, I've been so fortunate of having so many really wonderful memories. I think just working, actually working with, with the rowers and seeing the baby rowers going through from like when they were first sort of they've been picked, they were training in the boat, and then seeing them. I remember some of my favourite memories were sitting on the rock up in Silverton next to Jürgen, who'd go, it's going to be good. And then the next summer, Olympic gold. So seeing people through that journey of heartache, breakdown, getting back in the boat, being kicked out of the boat, back in the boat again, and then actually seeing them becoming, so working at the Commonwealth, so the Olympic Games in 2020 at 2012 at the rowing camp, and seeing my girls come in was fantastic. Really good.
Yeah, no, that is amazing. Great. No, well, that's a brilliant place to finish. I've really enjoyed it, Cath. Thank you very much. Your enthusiasm's infectious. So no wonder you're doing so well with everything. So thank you very much for sharing, and I look forward to speaking with you soon.
Thank you for having me.